Welcome to our third out of three series for Secure Senior Living. Today, we're going to be talking about conducting drills and after action reports. So, good afternoon and maybe good morning to some of you out there. And we'll start before we hop in. I'll just recap a little bit about what we've been doing up until this point. Maybe you were with us on those sessions, or maybe this is the first one. Want to catch you up so everybody can get some value out of today. So, what we're really doing is we're building on the foundations laid from our previous sessions. We're focusing on how important and critical the aspects of emergency preparedness and continuous improvement to senior living security is. So, we're going to talk today about how to put your security plans in actions through both effective drills, exercises, and how to gain really valuable insights from that after action analysis. So, without further ado, I guess we'll get rolling from there. Okay, so speakers today, my name is Ryan Mills. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I'm a former risk mitigation consultant and the director of customer engagement here at AccuShield, really trying to figure out how we can help make some buildings more secure and get the most out of the product while doing all of that to really take down the level of risk in communities. We know we're not always going to be able to stop or prevent things that occur in our communities and facilities, but our goal here is to help mitigate those. And I'll let Bill introduce himself here as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to those of you who saw our other two webinars. And thanks for joining us if you're new to this anyways. My name is Bill. I'm a former Marine and former law enforcement officer. Let those things go finally in my life after about 35 years. I also spent about 16 years or going on about 20 years now consulting with private organizations and faith-based organizations on building their crisis plans, testing their crisis plans, and then helping them merge their plans with what the first responders were going to want to see. So I kind of brought the two worlds together, if you will. I knew what first responders were going to do when they got there because I was training that side. And then on the civilian side, I was able to kind of coach them along to say, hey, this is what they're going to expect. This is what they're going to be able to do for you. This is what you need to be able to do for yourself. And so that's what brought me to AccuShield because of their deep interest in safety and security in the senior living community. So I'm just glad to be here and hope that you take away some valuable information from today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bill. And up until this point, we've been relying a lot on Bill's experience and personal stories, some fun things that have happened, some not some fun things that have occurred. And we'll get back into that today. And hopefully everything that we've been building towards, we're really able to give you a good foundation today, and you can walk away and go really exercise and drill these programs with our communities and facilities and try to make everybody a little bit safer, but on the same page as well. That's really our goal here. Communication is the key. So here we go. Quick question as we're getting started, and I know some people are still coming into this here, is when was the last time your community conducted an emergency drill? This could be tornado, fire, active shooter, just anything out there that isn't quite what we would see on a normal basis. That's really what we're asking here. In some cases, this could be a drill for how to send someone out on work comp if an employee gets injured or a resident's family. So just a few things like that that we want to check and see, take the temperature of where everyone is.
Well, we'd let everybody kind of answer that. I'll chime in here. The webinar series, if you've been here for the whole time, I'll refresh you. And if you're new, we'll kind of take you back a moment. Initially, we talked about, the importance, obviously, of safety and security for not only residents, but your staff as well. And that really even goes to the community around you because you can be that shareholder or that stakeholder there. And then we went into talking about designing an emergency plan for your community and how you do that by initially doing a vulnerability assessment to determine what you're at risk for. And that could be territorial, that could be your location geographically, or that could be the type of community you have, whether you have memory care or more independent living. So you're going to tailor your plan around your community, not just a cut and paste plan that you pulled down from somebody else. Now that we've got our plan in place, and then we talked about authoring that plan and how to store it and so forth. But now that we've got our plan in place, we're going to talk about testing that plan to make sure that it actually is valid, because these plans are written under blue skies. We're written in an air conditioned room when there's no stress and people have great ideas. While those are probably good ideas in some events, a lot of times when we put them into actual real world practice, we find out that maybe the time frame wasn't appropriate, the equipment wasn't right. And just a quick story: I'm in Florida, and I'm actually in the Tampa Bay area, and we just had, as you probably well know, one near miss hurricane and one direct impact hurricane. My son works for a senior living community, and they had to evacuate. And so, just as a story to kind of explain how that went, is they had a sister community to go to. They had their vehicles arranged. They briefed up their team on how they were going to do it. When the vehicles arrived, the vehicles each could only accommodate 2 wheelchairs. And they were moving about 40 residents, number of which needed wheelchair transport. The vehicles also had narrow aisles; they weren't really aisles to manage with. And he described how they had to carry most of their residents, both on and off those vehicles. One weighing over 300 pounds. That wasn't put in the plan, and now I'm sure it will be. But no one really thought about that. They just said, we got vehicles. Yep. Okay. We're moving here. Yep. And by the way, when they got there, they ended up having residents sleeping on the ground on mattresses on the floor. So while it might have looked great initially and it was on paper and maybe it was trained, had they drilled that and actually walked through it with the the boots on the ground, if you will, they might have found those mistakes before rain was in the sky and they had 6 hours to move from an evacuation area to avoid a Category 4 hurricane. So that's what we're trying to do with a drill, is really test that plan, whatever that plan is. Like Ryan said, active shooter, chemical spill, injury, evacuation for whatever reason, to see, is this really practical? Is it really going to work? And make sure all your staff that are actually the ones that are turning the wrenches and moving the stuff can do it in the time that you're saying it can be done in.
Yeah. Well said, Bill. Well said. If there's anyone else that is looking to vote in this poll, all it is if on the right-hand side of your screen, if you select that poll button, you'll be able to vote for us here. And some of the early results look very promising for what Bill and I like to see so far. Coming in within the last month, we got the right people on the call, and right discussion ready to go here if that's where we are. Too often, I know Bill and I were actually speaking about this in preparation. We've talked about fire drills before, and when people need to get compliant on fire drills, the one thing that a lot of our maintenance directors have done is they just pull the alarm and call the fire department and say, hey, we need to get our drilling up. We're doing this. Don't worry. You don't need to come out. We're all good. That's not anything we normally want to jump right into. Want to have our plan in place, want to have our exercises, our drilling, and not make it a situation that our drill becomes a panic, just because when we deal with those actual panics, which, as Bill was referring to, the hurricanes and when real evacuations come, we don't want to bring the unnecessary stress into our community on an everyday basis.
Right.
All right. Bill, if you're ready, I'm going on to the next.
Okay. So for our agenda today, let's discuss these two different words, exercise versus drill. And your terminology, they may be very clear to you, but we're going to make sure everybody understands those two actions are different, and what you're going to glean from either one of those two actions. We're going to dive into some best practices. This is from our experience and actually doing these things live, to where we got benefit and where we didn't. And then obviously really touching on safety. And then finally, we're going to talk about how we document these things. And this is, not only for your own benefit and what you're going to use those reports for, but also for in that big capital L word, liability, to show that you have a history of testing and training, not only to make sure your plan works, but to make sure your staff knows what to do when these critical events occur. So these are the three that we're really going to hit today, and hopefully you're going to walk away with at least something new. If you're already doing those drills, like the poll says, are you documenting that you did those drills? And then what are you doing with that information? Are you doing debriefings or hot washes with your staff to make sure that they didn't have anything to add? Because they're going to be the people that are really going to say, hey, it'd be better if we turn left as opposed to turn right here. They're going to give you that true valuable feedback. And then finally, how to conduct these things, how to do them safely and properly where they're beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, ready to dive in.
Okay. So putting a drill together for yourself. First of all, we want to make something that's applicable and practical to your location, like I said in the intro. One of the things that we really dove into in the last webinar, and you can go back and look at that and watch that on your own time, is a vulnerability assessment. And in that VA, you're going to ultimately come together with a risk index of your top 5, your top 10 things that generally are you're susceptible to. We want to make a drill or an exercise based on that information we know. So if your location is in Minnesota, you probably don't need to do hurricane drills and so on. So you kind of get the point. When we talk about exercise versus drill, though, okay, think about this. A drill is more of that physical thing. It's going to be more time consuming. It's going to be more people involved, including maybe even your residents. It's going to be an event where you're actually going to be moving people, moving equipment, actually maybe even some simulation to the type of event you're trying to reproduce or trying to train in. And so you can kind of see, some of the logistics that was going to be involved in putting together a drill. An exercise, on the other hand, is more of a cerebral event, if you will. It's we can sit around a table. A lot of times we call them tabletop exercises. We're going to sit around a table. We're going to have a scripted out plan, or a drill rather. You're going to have stakeholders from each one of your sections, or however you've broken down your organization, there to be calling out their decisions, to be making their calls. And then you're going to challenge them as they go through that exercise. Okay, here's what's going on now. What are you going to do? And then they're going to give the response, and someone's going to proctor those things. So, while you can kind of merge these, and I've done them as hybrids, where on one side of the building, we're actually physically doing things, and maybe on the other side of the building or in an office, we're having some of the higher level, maybe supervisors kind of, tabletopping along with this, kind of a command post, if you will, and making them fill those roles. But really ideally, I mean, they're two separate events. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of each of them here.
Bill, could you give me a little bit of insight into your past career in law enforcement and the military, how exercises looked for you guys then, and the
Sure.
importance of them for prior to action?
Right. So let's use active shooter. I think that term is probably pretty familiar with everybody. In 2000 or 1999, I'll be quite honest with you, law enforcement was not training for active shooter. I was on SWAT, and it wasn't even in our vocabulary. We obviously learned and started putting together things for that, or what we thought would be tactics for these. We started drilling them. We started testing them out. We used some models that came from the state, came from the federal government, and then put them into practice. And we started this with SWAT, where we actually went into closed hospitals or closed schools and used them as training sites, and practice these tactics that we were just basically shooting in the dark, because nobody had really come up with this stuff yet. We tried them on ourselves, and then we had role players play the bad guys, and we played the good guys, and vice versa. And truly, we war gamed it out physically, and learned what worked and what didn't work. And ultimately, what we came up with was some of the initial plans that came from the federal government, were bad tactical plans. They were just ideas. So we modified those, and ultimately we came up with, I'll give you an example. We started off with what we call the diamond formation, and then we moved into a T formation, and then we spent about 5 years working on that. And then ultimately we got to the point where we said, really, we're just going to do solo and paired response, because that's what it's going to truly look like. But until we actually got in the hallways, got sweaty, actually trained those things, practiced them, and then war gamed them against each other, we would have never known, what we are at today, which if you go to just about any law enforcement agency today, they're using a solo and paired response with multiple entries, and which looks nothing like what we initially learned in 2001. So that was from a lot of hard fought work, and a lot of training and exercise. And those exercises are intensive. We have safety officers that are dedicated just to perimeter and scene safety. We have, obviously extensive weapons checks, and to make sure there's no real, firearms in the training environment. There's, these are cops checking cops, and we're patting each other down and checking pockets. And so that, the safety event goes in. We have medical staff on scene with us. And then we go through actually a briefing with medical. So we know, where our staging area at, where our first trauma hospital is at, where the life flight helicopter is going to land. All this stuff is preempted, before anything even starts. And thank goodness, in my history of doing it, I taught this for, about half of my career. We never had to use one of those medical plans. But I can tell you, everyone on scene knew exactly what the medical plan was had there been an emergency. So you take the training seriously, because then the real event is, we say we sweat in training, so we don't have to bleed in the real event. So you take the training very seriously.
And I really think that's the recurring theme here that we've discussed over the past few webinars is no one necessarily has all the answers day one. And you're not going to have the answers unless you're ready to put that time, effort, thought, and practice in before the emergency does occur. We're not trying to scare anyone. We're not trying to say either we'll eliminate all your risk. We're hoping to mitigate it. We're hoping to keep everyone a little safer, keep everyone a little more secure, and hopefully just have everybody thinking in the back of their mind, what do we need prepared for? What do we need to be prepared for? So when disaster or an emergency does strike, it's not a 5-alarm fire going on,
Right.
that we know who to do which things with. We have responsibilities, and everyone's swimming in that same direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Bill. So let's go back. We know we touched on these a little bit. Let's talk about some of those considerations that go into both exercising and drills.
So you can see some of them spelled out there, and these are simply not all of them, but some high points that I wanted to kind of point out is that, like I said, a drill is going to be labor and time intensive. You're going to dedicate a day to it. You're probably going to dedicate several days prior authoring your drill, designing out who's going to be there. We're going to involve some outside entities, maybe law enforcement, to provide some scene safety for you or participate in drill. They would love to participate in your drill, by the way. Fire rescue and EMS, emergency medical services, they would love to participate in your drill. They want to do this stuff. They're doing it on their own, but actually go to a real live operational place and do it with people that are actually, going to be the respondees, if you will. That's the best training they can get. But planning that and putting that together and organizing that is going to be labor and time intensive. I want to point out it's going to be some intrinsic hazards. You're going to need safety measures. You're going to need, like I mentioned, a medical briefing. You're going to want to have staff on hand that are not involved in the drill. They're not participating. They're there purely just for safety, just for observers. You're going to need people to grade or to document what's occurring, the good things and the bad. It's going to be disruptive. Your operation, if you're doing a full scale drill and one of your wings, or even maybe even your entire community, obviously that's going to be disruptive. So planning that around meal times, planning it around other operations, other people that are getting therapy treatments and so forth. So it's going to be disruptive. The caveat to this is it's the closest way that you can truly find out if your plan is valuable or not. It's the only real way that you're going to be able to see where those links are missing, you know. Um, so in a nutshell, you see those bullet points for a drill and you're maybe starting to shy away from it, saying, well, I don't want anything to do with this. An exercise is a good alternative. Like I mentioned, a tabletop exercise, air conditioned room, bring some snacks in, invite the people, and you can still invite local, the city, the county, the law enforcement representatives, the medical and fire representatives, to have them there as either subject matter experts or participants. Because when you say, okay, in event X, this is going to happen, and then fire rescue will show up, and then suddenly the fire rescue is going to say, no, we're actually going to stage down the street and wait for law enforcement to get there to make sure a scene's safe. And you say, well, I didn't realize you did that. That's how we learn those things. And you can learn them in an exercise where you actually have those people at the table talking about it. And obviously the exercise is less impactful, less disturbing. And maybe you're certainly not involving your residents in it, which can be, it can be disturbing for the residents. Even in your mind, it's a drill. It can be upsetting to their daily operations and their routines. And we don't want to do that if we don't have to.
Yeah, all perfectly said there, Bill, from everything that I've seen before. One thing to talk about here is we talked about getting everyone around the table. Let's talk about who those people are. So when I was a risk manager with my organization, something we always talk about were safety committees. I know you guys are probably familiar with them, you've heard of them, but who should be on that safety committee? And we always looked at it as having at least or one person from every single department. So that way we can have a true division of labor and we can truly break up and have all of these considerations from all the different viewpoints. So when there is a fire drill, we know that servers handle this portion of things, CNAs do this, med techs do this, activities does this. Everyone kind of goes in their own way so they can retreat back to their own departments and let everyone else know what to do. So very important to really think about that and purposely plan who is part of these meetings and who's passionate about this and who's going to remember it and spring into action when, not everything's perfect.
Right. You couldn't be more dead on for that because, we even talked about when we talked in webinar 2 and authoring your plan. And that safety committee becomes integral there too. And I mean, this can't be put on the shoulders of, one person of the, the director of nursing. Here, your job is to write our emergency plan for the community. That's not a one person job. And certainly they're not going to understand some of the intrinsic things, like you said, that happens in food prep or that happens in facility maintenance. There's always that, I think just about every place, and you're already thinking about that person in your mind, is you have that guy or that gal that's in your community, that's your maintenance head, or that's the one that when the sprinkler head breaks or the tractor breaks down or they need a bus, he's got the biggest ring of keys hanging off his belt. He knows where all the roomers are at, where all the switches are at. That person needs to be on this committee too. He's the one that knows where all the the special things are at that nobody else has to pay attention to. Fire shutoff stations and that sort of thing. So having that consortium of knowledge come together at that table, when one side says, we're just going to move them over to Wing E, someone's going to say, Wing E is, not available for this many people right now, or, and so you've got that knowledge there as opposed to just guessing, and your exercise is going to be more valuable when you bring them all to the table.
And another part for all of this is not every situation needs to be a life or death emergency. So a lot of times it could be a pipe burst and it's going to, destroy rooms, not lives, and maybe valuables, maybe lead to insurance claims, a lot of money coming out of the community. Does everyone know where that water shutoff is or where to get there? Is it a weekend where that director or plant ops service director isn't there, as Bill was talking to? Is there multiple other people that know how to get into that closet and shut off that water main if needed to? So things just like that. It's not necessarily a natural disaster or an emergency always that we need to be considering. It could be things that could negatively financially impact residents, staff, or families.
Right, right. And that risk index we talked about, that list out your list of threats, if you will, or your priority or your hierarchy of threats. When I was consulting doing this for private organizations, usually what rang my phone is that somebody wanted me to come teach them active shooter tactics, for lack of a better term, or how to prevent, which is a word that I hate. But when I got there, I learned so much more doing a vulnerability assessment about their community, their location. I told them that you're going to have a pedestrian hit by a car in the parking lot long before you're going to have a plane fall out of the sky, or a meteorite hit your community. And so those basic things of making sure can everybody get to the nearest AED. Walk around one day and just ask the staff in your community, where's the nearest fire extinguisher to your location? Where's the nearest fire pole, alarm pole station to your location? Where's the nearest AED? um, your medical side may know that. Your administrative side may have no idea, you know. And so, that's where we kind of get into this exercise drill thing, is challenge them for something like that. Like Ryan said, it could be, okay, you've lost the use of, your main dining hall for 2 days because of a water main break. That would be in my world kind of a crisis. What are you going to do with your residents? How are you going to feed them? Do you have a backup location set up? How can you get food prep set up over there? And so until you've practiced those things, there's no blueprint in your mind how to get to it, and you don't want to make those decisions when you're in crisis mode.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill. Okay. I know we discussed some of these, so we can not spend too much time there.
Sure.
But
But
let's
realistic events, we've got it bolded there. Keep them realistic to your community. Things that maybe not necessarily likely, but can happen. And use that vulnerability assessment that you did earlier to determine what you're going to do. This is also one of those things you can start small, start simple. You don't have to do your first drill experience as a full-blown active shooter with law enforcement and fire rescue and the entire community. Ease yourself into this thing. If you're going to do an exercise, the tabletop side, or just a story time exercise, let's have someone come or someone inside your community already or on your staff and actually administer this, help you put this thing together, because someone with some experience is going to understand, keeping to timelines, maintaining or evaluating some of those solutions that are just unrealistic. When someone says, transportation says, well, I'll have 5 buses here in half an hour. Okay. Tell me how that works and tell me where they're coming from. And do you have a memorandum of understanding with that location or that entity? Do they have 5 drivers just sitting in a room waiting to come over here right now? Because they don't. And so, that proctor, that administrator is going to make them fight through those things, as opposed to just saying, yeah, we'll take care of it. Well, we're doing an exercise to actually plan this thing out to make sure your plan actually works, and then ensure policy and procedures, that when you find things that are errors in there, you find mistakes in there, make sure you're changing your policy and procedures to the correct solutions. When we find out we can't get 5 buses here in half an hour, okay, then make sure you've updated your emergency plan to reflect that. That's what you're going to glean from these exercises ultimately, is how to modify it. You're going to find errors. That's your goal. And then you're going to tweak those, polish the edge of the sword, and move on to the next one and keep on testing it.
Absolutely. My 2 to 3 cents to add in on that always is trust but verify. Yeah. If that vendor for the buses says they can get there in 30 minutes, like Bill said, let's talk through it. Where are they coming from? Push them on it. If you're going to be the ones paying them money, and we know charter buses are not cheap or anything along those lines, let's talk about it. Where's your lot? How long does it take to get there? What is a realistic expectation for how long from when I order a bus to when they get to the community and get rolling out of there? Is that how much time is going to elapse? What's that going to look like? And we can only do that by verifying. And this also goes with, you walk around, you start asking people, do you know what our plan is for if we have a flood? Do you know what our plan is if we have a hurricane, a tornado, those things? Oh, yeah. You can trust them. take that on face value, say, okay, great, but you got to verify it too. And we verify that through exercises, drilling, and really testing people's knowledge.
Right.
Okay, so now drilling best practices.
So the first one, I couldn't make it any bolder, darker, or underlined, is surprise drills. Okay. And let me just divert for just a moment for, back in the old days of active shooter training, is that I wasn't involved in this, but I am, personally aware of a surprise active shooter drill that a law enforcement agency and a school had designed together. And they decided to really test that plan, to really put everybody to task. They were going to do a surprise drill or surprise active shooter event, which means they didn't tell anyone on campus this is happening. And they did even authored quite an elaborate background to this drill, where the alleged shooter was a cop in training, was to show up to the campus and start asking for this. He was looking for this one boy that he had a problem with, who he was apparently there to hurt or kill. So as they launched this surprise drill, this student in this script wasn't aware of this drill and was a real student on the campus. And so when this strange man showed up, started demanding this child to come forward, of course, nobody knows this is a training event or a drill. The child got word of it and fled the campus, wound up missing for about 4 or 5 hours until they could finally find him and convince him that this was a test. It wasn't, and I could tell you probably, another 10 or 15 stories of surprise drills that just went horribly, horribly wrong. So, just take that as the top line. If you don't walk away with anything else, don't do surprise drills. You're gonna cause stress, anguish, anxiety, and other problems that you really aren't trying to do. You're trying to do a good thing here. I've already mentioned outside subject matter experts. Bringing them in, they're going to be more than happy to do it. And by the way, they don't charge anything to come over there. They'll help you proctor it. They'll participate in it, be role players. It's good training for them too. A big no here, or maybe a maybe if you really feel like it's necessary, but props and training aids. When you start pumping smoke down a hallway, regardless of what that smoke is, with a fog machine, and I've seen a lot of it. I won't say I've seen it all. Sometimes, in a law enforcement fire community where they do this regularly and all the time, and having moulage injuries or the fake injuries and so forth, that can be beneficial to them because you're putting them to task to how would you handle this. But for surely the shock factor, or for surely just to make it look more dramatic, you're not getting much benefit out of those training aids like that. If you are going to use them, make sure you have somebody that knows what they're doing. I say trained professional, that identify what the benefit of this thing is. It's not just for the drama or the emotion of it. Do we really need to do this? And then safety personnel. I've already mentioned it earlier. I would picture this. I would picture Ryan having personnel you designated, depending on how big your exercise or drill is, that are wearing their reflective traffic vests. They're wearing a bold red shirt or something that makes them stand out. They are not participants. They're not to interject, but they are there purely to monitor, so that if a real world event were to happen during your training, they could stop it. And law enforcement used to say cold, 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 and everybody knew everything stops no matter what you're doing. There's something actual going on. We've had some injuries, nothing fortunately too serious, occur during training, and is this guy playing along? Is this part of the exercise, or is he actually hurt? And so those safety personnel are going to be there to monitor that, to make sure that everybody's staying in the lane of reality, if you will, and that, we do this safely.
Bill, after looking at some of this here, I don't know if you or anyone else on this call here is familiar with the show The Office, but we could have added this clip in here.
I was thinking about it, but I didn't want to say it. But
if anyone wants to know what not to do with the drill, go look up The Office fire drill. And I think every one of Bill's comments here goes against what was actually done in that practice, where injuries did occur.
Don't hire Michael for your emergency plan.
Absolutely. Okay, let's hear Bill. Let's hear the words of the wise here.
Okay, train, drill, assess. I already mentioned the surprise drill. Certainly that would probably kind of fall into this category, if you will. But what we want to do is we want to make this beneficial. We want to give this something that someone walks away with positive feelings about. If they hate training, if they hate doing the drills, if they hate because they know they're just being set up for failure, they're going to get nothing out of it. They're going to get a negative, aspect to it. So to battle that, okay, don't set your students up for failure. You're going to teach them the technique, however you decide in-house to teach that, whether during onboarding or during refresher training, PowerPoint, classroom instruction, etc. But let's make sure they understand what's required of them, what you want them to do. They've never done this before. This is your plan. um, Provide repetition. Training and repetition go hand in hand. These are perishable skills. Just because you've done it once doesn't mean you're ready. Okay. Because everyone has their regular jobs they're required to do. They go back to learning those and doing those. So the first time you drew blood or the first time you did, a technique, you probably weren't the best at it. And then finally, we're going to actually evaluate or grade it. Okay, so the train, drill, assess model is imperative in any kind of training environment, is you don't want to set up your students for failure. You want to make sure they understand it. They've got some time to practice it, and then evaluate it, and then do some correction at that point in time, but do it in positive fashion. Nobody wants to be embarrassed. Nobody wants to be pointed out to say, "Look what they did," type thing, because you've just lost that person now. And then the repetition, you got to consider the degree of difficulty in the task. Some things might be relatively mundane, so maybe you don't need that much repetition, but frequency of that task, as well as degree of difficulty of that task, might mean more training and more repetition before you actually get to that testing part of it. But if you use this model, I think your staff or your students, as I call them, are going to come away with a more positive aspect or positive outlook when the next time you come down and say, "Hey, we've got some section training we need to do tomorrow," and they're all going to go, "Oh." Where you don't want that response. You want them to say, "Yes, I'm ready to do this. We're going to move on to the next step."
Yeah. And it just goes back to honestly being a good manager employee relationship here, where I know many of you have been in a situation where you've looked at a boss or a supervisor, manager, and they put you on the spot to quiz you. And if you think about how that makes you feel, let's add all the added pressure for an emergency situation where lives could be on the line or public safety could be on the line. And there's just too many different emotions and situations that go along with that to be playing gotcha with each other in these.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
So we've done our drill or our exercise. And then, what do we learn from that? Well, the reason why we're doing it is to make sure it works, or to find there's places in it is not going to work. I can guarantee you, no matter how good your plan is, if you test it or drill it enough, you're going to find out that there's places that can need improvement. There's no perfect plan. So when we learn those things, we're going to talk about here what we do with that information and how we use that to benefit us. So we've probably heard the term maybe after action report or hot wash before, maybe debriefing. But let's kind of go in a little bit more, Ryan, specifically about what these mean. So if I start with a hot wash, or a debriefing, if you will, I really would recommend, and this is what I do, or what I did when I was in the field, if you will, after a relatively serious event, a major shooting scene or a major crime scene that my deputies had to respond to. I always made sure before we left, we at least did a hot wash at the scene. We taught it. We call it tailgate talk, because we had Tahoes, and so we'd open the tailgate and we all stand back there. Part of that was to make sure that everybody was accounted for. And that hot wash debriefing is part of that too, is make sure everybody came back. You didn't leave someone on a perimeter. Somebody didn't get hurt. They weren't, missing equipment. And we'd go through and make sure that everybody was present. And then we'd kind of go through just a little quick timeline of what happened, what was done, why things were done, why I made decisions I made, and let them feedback as well. If this isn't a one-way street here, those people out there in the scene, I learned a great deal during hot washes when that guy or gal that was on that inner perimeter position that said, "Hey, we didn't know this was happening when this element was moving up. Nobody told us this." Okay, that's not time for me to argue back and say, "Hey, I was too busy to explain that to you." That's time for me to make a note to myself, say, "Listen, I need to make sure my inner perimeter knows when my assault team is moving." And so those are good learning lessons for me. So we can accomplish that and that debrief, hot wash, discuss immediately afterwards. But it also helps people kind of talk it out of you a little bit, kind of decompress a little bit, depending on this might not be a big deal for you. Maybe it was a big deal for them. Maybe this is the first time they've ever experienced something like this. Pedestrian crash in the parking lot. It's just no big deal. They got taken to the hospital. The first person there with them, that might have been a big deal for them. That might have impacted them differently than you realize. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of look at your people also and say, I might need to talk to Matt just a little bit more to make sure he's okay before I just throw him back into the pool.
Mm-hmm.
An after action report, that's more formal documentation. That's more of the we're going to document, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to build those. But that's actually a formal report of what occurred, how it occurred, who was there, and what happened that we learned from. You can do both of these, and it's really up to your community what you think you need, what requires an AAR versus a hot wash.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Bill and everyone else, I know we're getting close to time here, so we're going to try and finish everybody up within the limit. So just bear with us a little while longer, and we'll love to hear all your
That's
questions.
my fault. I get excited when I talk about this stuff.
So do I. We can go back and forth with this all day.
So it's really up to your community whether you need an AAR or a hot wash. I would recommend after training events, you're going to have an AAR because that's going to not only document that you did training, but then it's going to document what you learned from that training. Minor events, maybe like I said, a water main break or something like that, still could get an AAR. Less types of things, minor injuries or maybe a needle start, poke or something like that. Maybe a hot wash afterwards, make sure everybody, kind of understands what we did and why we did it. But you can do both. Like I said, do the debriefing initially afterwards, the hot wash right afterwards, and then sit down and actually put in that pen to paper to document this total event using that information you gained from the hot wash too.
Yeah. It all comes back to communication and documentation.
Right.
Okay. So building that after action report.
Okay, so here's your safety committee. It's a collaborative effort, right? It doesn't mean one person has to write this thing either, because that's going to be a big task to put on one person's shoulder. Reasonable timelines. I want to make sure this thing is done while it's still fresh. If we're still waiting, 4 months later for an after action report, you've lost everything you gleaned from that now. Because memories have faded, time has passed, people have forgotten. So a reasonable time period, and that's up to your community to decide how long you're going to put in that safety committee to get this after action report submitted and approved. But the sooner the better. Okay. There's gonna be a lot of information in it, which you'll see in just a minute. But we want to get that compiled and get that logged so we can also start responding to this thing, because we may have this same emerging in another week. Are we ready for it now? We just went through it. Did we learn anything from it? And then how you retain that, whether it be a physical document or electronic document, who you share those with. I think you need to retain them in some way, shape, or form. And then also have your emergency plan reference back to those AARs, to the lessons learned and why we do what we do now, because we learned in this event that we got to do it this way because of wing E or whatever we came up with in that. So don't just, toss that away in someone's drawer. Keep a record of those. It's going to show a record of training. It's going to show a record of events and how you respond to those. I'll say liability one last time and then I'll stop using it, but it's also going to show, compliance and some due diligence on your part, that you've at least made a reasonable effort, that you didn't just ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So authoring this thing, the easiest way to think about, composition 1 in first year college, introduction, body, narrative, summary. So let's start off with statistical data. what occurred, where it occurred, times, location, people present, entities involved. In your description, and this is it could be just a flowing narrative. You can break it down into sections, however you decide to design it. There's lots of templates online you could probably download just to kind of get the juices flowing. But even just a couple paragraphs of event description, a rolling narrative of how this thing happened. If you have supporting documents, whether it be police reports, fire EMS reports, photographs, video, that type of thing, it's certainly good to put those in there. Break down a list of your sections that you're going to kind of evaluate or cover. There I've written some ideas like response, hot zone, your perimeter, evacuation methods, where you went to. You kind of break down your topics there into maybe sub paragraphs. Ultimately, the most important part of this document or this creation here is your list of discrepancies. And if there are no discrepancies, then you didn't look hard enough, because there's going to be. You want to list out the things that went wrong. Don't pat yourself on the back the whole time of how good things went out. We all know that part. Let's look for the things that could be better. List those discrepancies out. And then, like I said, you're going to document those, and you're going to save those, and you're going to reference them back, or reference your emergency plan back to this, so we know why those changes were implemented, why we made those things, and where we learned them. You may not be there next time. Someone else is new is going to know why do we do this? This is why we do this, because we learned here that it works better this way. That's where your real stake is at in your AR, is your discrepancies.
Makes sense. That's valuable information, Bill. And discrepancy is always what we're looking for, where how we think something is going to happen versus how it actually does, and figuring out what we can do to make those match up maybe a little bit closer.
Right. So the military used to say that no combat ready unit was ever passed an inspection, so those discrepancies are the ones that tell you, they tell the truth, if you will. Let me kind of summarize up. I'll close out my part by letting you know, or just kind of mull over this. You're planning for the worst day you've ever had. And you got to kind of let your mind go there, because, nobody gets up in the morning and said, this is my day. This is the day that everything comes down. Nobody thinks that's going to happen to them. But if you kind of let your mind go there for a few minutes, and while you're writing these plans and while you're doing your drills, and remember that, that your staff, your residents, everybody involved in this thing is probably just as anxious and stressed about this. In a real event, even sometimes during training, they're being flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. They're not thinking about long-term, career decisions. They're just trying to get through the moment. These are stressful events. These are critical events. Sometimes, like I said, like Ryan said, even lives depend on these decisions and these policies and plans. So without making it too heavy, think about that when you're writing these plans. These are sometimes life-changing events that we're planning for. We're going to hope for the best. Absolutely. But we want to be ready, so that when those gray skies come, we're not making it any worse because we failed to plan. We showed, negligence in our actions, and just didn't really put the effort in the front end because we said, it's probably not going to happen to me. That's not true. It might happen to you.
And I'm sure many of you on this call are nurses or been in healthcare for a long time and understand everything that kind of goes along with it. And what I mean by that is what I always used to talk about with my nurses, my healthcare staff, really anyone, is if we have 500 residents in a building, we're not going to make every single one of those residents happy. But what you can do is put in the effort on your end to know you've done everything the best way that you can to the best of your ability. And you've done your job. And in doing that, you're impacting the lives of everyone else. And that's really what this is too. We know doing everything perfectly and everything that we can do right on a daily basis isn't going to prevent some of these disasters, but it can bring some solace to your team, your residents, your families, your staff, anyone around, that we know which direction we're going in, and that we're going to sleep easy at night knowing even if everything doesn't go right, we were prepared and did everything to the best of our ability for it to hopefully go right.
Right. Right.
Okay, so we do have a security preparedness self-assessment that Bill has helped us put together here that is fantastic to take some time and kind of just assess your own community. Walk around, notice a few things. Not everything has to do with absolute emergencies. Some of it could be fall and trip hazards. Those small things that happen on a daily basis that could build to something else where, again, we're not just about mitigating damage, saving lives, we're about mitigating lawsuits as well. We don't want these insurance claims that bring things to a halt in our building to be happening because we'd rather prevent or mitigate that from the beginning. I said the P word there, so rewind and imagine I didn't say it and just said mitigate.
I'll forgive you for that one.
Thank you. We almost made it to the very end of all of it, and there's the slip up. So another part to look at in this is outside of the natural disasters and those. And what AccuShield does is it captures and verifies everyone who enters your building in and out. And so this is important during any type of emergency or evacuation situation, not just on knowing who is in the building, if there's family members visiting, maybe grandkids, home health, but also knowing who's not there. So say we have a resident who went out to lunch with her daughter. Miss Smith is gone. She didn't sign out. Nobody knows where she was. She's in a wheelchair as it is. So, she's not moving very well. And there's a fire that occurs. We're running around. We're checking rooms, doing tagging like we're all trained to do from our certifications. And we can't find Miss Smith. There's no record of her leaving. There's no record of her anywhere. And now someone is probably putting their own safety at risk and their own life at risk, looking around, circling that building when they should be evacuating everyone else. Whereas with AccuShield, we know who's in, who's out, and we can run a evacuation report as well right off your phone. So you can check those things. You can also see who's ambulatory, who's not, who's able to move on their own, who needs a staff member to go in there and help. And this information and having this stored digitally, being able to hand that to first responders, being able to be truly the first responders yourself within your own staff can save so much time. And we know in this case, time is health, time is lives, time is safety. So anything we can do to react quickly, easily, and as well as plan is what we want to do here at AccuShield.
The value in that is, I really can't speak to it enough, because before AccuShield, when we taught our locations, our schools, our churches, and corporations, this was something that was done manually. It was an analog version where you'd have reuniting posts, and then section leaders would go through and do roll calls. And then we had to physically go to each one of them, manually to talk about who was accounted for, who's not, and so forth. And this was probably one of the most time consuming portions of an emergency response was, who's accounted for. And in the meantime, we're sending resources or assets, looking for them, to try to find them in hot zones and dangerous areas. To be able to do this on your phone is just, it's magical. It really is. And it's such an invaluable tool for the first responder side. When we show up and this is available to us, I can't speak to how important this is.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And now, question portion. But before, everyone submit questions to us now. We'll do our best to answer them. But I'd like to thank you, Bill, for your time, your effort, your expertise, just everything we've worked on together over the past few months. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I think the rest of the team here at AccuShield, we've learned a lot. I think you've provided us, and as well as our listeners and audience here, just some invaluable information and posing it in a way that's not scary, but attainable.
Right. Right. And I really appreciate the opportunity. As you probably know, I do get excited when I talk about this stuff. I love to train, and that's about not looking for the worst or hoping for the worst, is because it's about being ready. And that's really what we want to be, is we want to be, ready for it. We want to have that mental blueprint in our mind. And it's been a joy for me to be able to participate in this. I love what AccuShields does. I've worked with them before, and I keep on coming back to them because I truly believe in their mission as well. And so it's been my pleasure, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you.